Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Skaberg with Consolidated Planning Group. We are excited that you're here today. Today, we are going to be talking with Ginger Mayeaux today from the ARC of Texas on the ever popular topic of Texas waivers and waiting lists. She's got a lot of information that she's going to share with us today, and we're excited to have her back. I would like to launch a poll really quick. We have a lot of people here today, and basically, I just want to understand who you guys are and what brings you here today. So if you'll this should just be popping up on your screen in just a second. Okay, see if you guys are seeing that on your screen now. Just kind of vote to see what is the best, what best describes you and your situation here today. And we're going to just give it about 5 more seconds, and we're going to end the poll momentarily. Okay, I think people are finishing up their voting. All right. Okay, so we got about 28% a parent with a special needs teen transitioning into adulthood, 20% a parent with a special needs child under 18, and 24% looking at a professional or an advocate. So thanks for that. So again, Allison Skaberg, Consolidated Planning Group, we're a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We do a lot of educational events on special needs planning related topics. We put these out there on a weekly basis. You may be getting emails from us letting you know what our monthly events are. So thanks. If this is your first time, we're glad you're here. If you're joining us again, we're glad you're back. So happy for that. So Consolidated Planning Group, we just really, when it comes to a holistic approach to planning, we really do a lot of listening and understanding in an effort to understand what's important to you and you know what you want the future to look like for your special needs child, but also overall for your overall life and retirement, because those are other factors that we have to think about as well. So if you need help with those services, feel free to reach out. I'm going to launch one more poll. I want to have a better understanding as it relates to when it comes to special needs planning. Kind of where you are, you know, on what is the most important topics that you're struggling with right now, or the areas that you feel like you need the most help as it relates to special needs planning. So just read those options, and you can check as many as are appropriate for you. And just give it a few seconds there for sure. About 5 more seconds, and we'll end the poll. All right, and those results should be popping up on the screen. So we have almost a tie for future care planning, waivers, and interest lists. That's something that we definitely hear about all the time, but basically all across the board. So thank you for sharing that information with us. Well, without further ado, we've got a ton of slides and a ton of information to go over. So I am excited to turn everything over to Ginger Mayeaux with the ARC of Texas. So take it away, Ginger.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm thrilled to be here again. And good news that so many people are interested in the waivers, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want to start out by just giving you guys a heads up. The weather is really bad where I'm at, so if there's any glitches, just bear with me. I'll be right back if something happens, but we're going to keep our fingers crossed. And with that, I'm going to go right on in. Here is the obligatory Who is the ARC of Texas slide. As you can see, we promote, protect, and advocate for the human rights and self-determination of Texans with intellectual and developmental disabilities. more specifically, what I do and what the Public Policy and Advocacy team that I direct does is we try to monitor things for you guys and then relay that information to you. We also want to listen to what the needs of the real people with IDD and their families are and relay those things to the legislators and state agencies. So I kind of see us as a liaison sometimes between decision makers and the people most impacted. But the best thing I think we do is train and empower people like you to speak up for yourself, because your voice is always going to be the most important and the most impactful, not only at the legislature and state agency level, but also in the community, changing attitudes. So with that, I'll move on. It's a lot of information to cover in an hour. So as you can see, we're going to kind of talk about the what, who, where, how, when, and why of services in Texas, specifically Medicaid waivers, but you have to understand some of the bigger pieces of the system to understand the waivers and what that means and how we can potentially work together to reduce some of those long waiting lists I know most of you are probably familiar with. And because I have so much information and only an hour, I know Allison will share my slides after today. And so a lot of what you'll see in here is going to be for your reference afterward. And then you're always welcome to reach out to me to follow up in more detail about anything specific you see in the slide. So let's start with what is Medicaid? That might seem odd to some of you, but in almost 15 years of working in this field, I have learned that a lot of people are never given the basic foundation of what is Medicaid. We start over here with what is a waiver, and we don't ever start with the basics. So I'm going to start with that. It's really important to understand that Medicaid is a state and federal partnership, which means we get money from the federal government to run Medicaid programs, and we have some regulations from the federal government on what we can do with our Medicaid funds. But for the most part, the state gets to set their own rules and establish how they want to deliver Medicaid services, which is why you'll hear people say it doesn't transfer state to state. It's not like Medicare. So if you were getting great services in California or Ohio or whatever, and you move to Texas, you don't take those Medicaid benefits with you, and vice versa. It's also really important to understand that Medicaid provides two types of services and supports, or insurance, however you want to look at it: acute care and long-term services and supports. Acute care is really just the fancy way of saying medical care, and it's all the things that most of us are familiar with in private insurance world. Going to your primary care physician, if there's an emergency, going to that. Even something like if you break a bone, going to an orthopedist or something, but they're typically short-term things. I apologize, you might be able to hear the thunder, but I can't mute and talk to you, so. But then we also have the long-term services and supports side, which are all the things that people with disabilities need to live as independently as possible and have a quality of life. These are things that are almost never, ever, ever covered by private insurance. So there are things like your personal care services, or an attendant, or community first choice. You might, there's different names for the same thing in our world, or getting a job coach, living in a group home or a host home. All those things that are critical to people with disabilities are only provided through the Medicaid system. And so that's why it's really important to understand the difference in the acute care and the long-term services world, because there's a misconception by people not in our world that, well, if you just have private insurance, you don't need a Medicaid waiver and whatnot. But that's not true, because your private insurance isn't going to provide you with an attendant to help you get in and out of bed or get dressed in the morning. It's also important to recognize that long-term services and supports through Medicaid are predominantly provided in two ways, either an institution or the community. And I'm going to dig a little further into that here. So I apologize. I think this was supposed to be animated and something went wrong. So you're getting like a sneak peek of what was going to be circled. But when we talk about institution and community, it's also similar to talking about entitlement versus waiver. So way back when Medicaid first came about, the only options to provide those long-term services and supports for people were through an institutional model. First, we had nursing facilities, and then we had what we call intermediate care facilities, which is the institutions designed for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They are entitlements. Most people are familiar with entitlements in the same, from a school setting. So everyone is entitled to a public education. It's your right. The government will provide that to you. Long-term services through an institution like a nursing facility or state-supported living center in Texas are entitlements. Medicaid waivers, on the other hand, are the flip side of that. They were designed as an alternative to the institutional model. And so they waive off of the entitlement, or it's like you're saying, I don't want that entitlement. I'm going to waive my right to that and wait for the community services because that's where I want to live. They weren't developed until the 80s. And again, as an alternative to institutions. Unfortunately, because they are not entitlements, you do not have a right to those services just because you are eligible. Which is why you see long wait lists for waivers, and there are no wait lists for institutions. States are not allowed to establish wait lists. If you're eligible, you have to get it, just like they can't make you wait for a public school. They can make you wait for waivers, and it is 100% dependent on how much the legislature decides to fund every 2 years when they go into session. This right here that you're looking at, I know it seems really fuzzy and confusing in some ways. This is what institutional bias is. When you hear people talk about institutional bias, institutions are an entitlement, community services through a waiver are not. So now I'll dig deeper into the waivers. We have the, I think this is 6 waivers in Texas. I am going to talk about the first few. I am not going to dive into the youth empowerment services or YES waiver because it's predominantly a mental health waiver for children. And that's not what the ARC of Texas focuses on. But if you're interested in that, I can get you to people who can talk more in depth about it. So this is a super high level overview slide. Let's see if I always try to move my cursor and y'all can't see that, but I think you can see the spotlight. So if we were in person during this training, I would constantly flip back to this slide. And I'll try to do that throughout the training because to me, I'm a very visual person. So when I see all of the opportunities for long-term services and whatnot put in one place, it makes more sense to me. So bear with me for a second and I'll lay out this high-level overview and then I'll go into each waiver and hopefully by the end, it'll all come together. So like I said a few minutes ago, we've got Medicaid. Medicaid provides acute or medical care to people who are low income or have disabilities. And then it provides these long-term services and supports like your attendance and stuff. The acute care side of Medicaid provides medical care through what they call Star Plus for adults, Star Kids for kids. In the long-term service world, you can receive your services through a nursing facility or an ICF or SSLC. Those are the two institutions. Or you can receive services in the community through things that waive off of those institutions, like I said. And the reason nursing facility and ICF are divided separately is because the eligibility for a nursing facility is different. Nursing facility, as the name implies, you need nursing care to be eligible. ICFs and yes, Allison.
I was going to say, can you just share what those acronyms, we're so used to throwing those acronyms around, what the ICF and the SSLC stands for?
Yes. And if the waivers get confusing, just remember back here, I define those. I do not define the SSLC. So ICF is Intermediate Care Facility, and SSLC is State Supported Living Center. State Supported Living Centers are intermediate care facilities. In Texas, our publicly funded and run ICFs are the State Supported Living Centers. And then we've got private ICFs, which are also entitlements and also through Medicaid, but they tend to be smaller homes and are run by private providers, not state employees. So eligibility for the intermediate care facilities / state supported living centers, you have to have an intellectual and developmental disability to be in one of those, which is basically the same criteria for all of these waivers here in blue. And these waivers here in blue. I'm not going to get into community first choice in depth today, which is what CFC stands for, just because we don't have time. But CFC is a fantastic program that is not a waiver. It is an entitlement if you receive Medicaid and need those services. So if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk further. It basically is attendant services and habilitation. So basic attendant services you can get through community first choice if you have Medicaid and need those services, but it's not a comprehensive waiver. And then last thing I'll say about this slide is the red lines around some of these you see means that that is in a managed care model. And there are some slides later in the presentation that address what is managed care, but I just wanted to distinguish if they're outlined in red, it's in managed care. If it's not outlined in red, it's still fee for service, which is what we're used to most of the time in Texas. So general eligibility, again, this is going to be for your reference later because it obviously lists in the weeds stuff. But as you can see, all waivers except MDCP and Star Plus, which if it helps you, they're the two that waive off of nursing facility. They're also both fully in managed care. They're the only two waivers that aren't for all ages. MDCP stands for Medically Dependent Children's Program, so it's for kiddos. Star Plus, HCBS is for adults. All the other waivers, there's no age difference. And then all the waivers except Texas Home Living have a higher financial threshold than basic Medicaid. So for a lot of families who need the supports through Medicaid, the waivers are truly a lifeline because you can have a higher income level, particularly when it comes to waiving parental income for kiddos. That can be huge. And then each waiver has different functional eligibility criteria, which essentially means what kind of supports does each person need. So if Allison has a need because she's deaf, blind, has cerebral palsy, she's going to be eligible for a different waiver than I might be eligible for if I have autism.
So basically here, like for the Medicaid, you know, for the requirements to maintain Medicaid, so the 300%, basically they can have no more than $2,313 in their name, and they still maintain their eligibility. So where some of this comes into play is where your kids switch over. So your child turns 18, they're eligible for SSI and Medicaid, and then in another 15 or 20 years, you retire and you're getting Social Security, and then your child is eligible for 50% of that benefit. So their numbers go up, basically. But you can still maintain your waiver as long as you don't, you know, go over this threshold, and you do that by having an ABLE account and a special needs trust. But the bottom line is when you make that switch over and your child is getting 50% of your Social Security benefit, if you're not careful, you could have been on this waiting list for all these years, and now you've come up and you're actually getting a waiver, and you could actually lose the waiver. So this is really an important piece to understand. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. And I know Allison probably can help with a lot of that kind of stuff. I know we have a person on our staff who's pretty good with this, because there are different things based on your situation, where even when you get the 50% of your parents' SSI, there's different things like I'm sure Allison's familiar with the Pickle Amendment and different things that this is out of my realm of expertise, but it's always important to consult with someone in the know to avoid an unintended consequence. That a lot of these things can be avoided if you have the knowledge beforehand. So again, more reference for you guys, but these are services available in all waivers. There's always caveats when we talk about Medicaid, so I apologize. It can't just be black and white, but you can see these are services in all the waivers except an MDCP. But the thing with MDCP is it's for children, and children's Medicaid is more inclusive than adult Medicaid already. So just because these aren't included in the MDCP waiver doesn't mean children can't get it. They get it through their basic acute care Medicaid. These are some other waiver services that are not available in everything, but just kind of giving you an idea. And now the best way to understand the different options in the waivers and the different waivers, I think, is by telling you guys some stories of some people who receive different services through different waivers based on their individual needs, which is the cool thing about waivers, is it's meant to address each individual person's support needs, not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this is my friend Charlie. And as you can see from this slide, Charlie is very proud that he has his HCS waiver because he lives in his own house with a support person. He has what they call a host home. Charlie lived in an institution, a state-supported living center, for 35 years before getting his HCS waiver slot, and is so proud of being able to live as independently as he does. But what's great is Charlie does need support. So he lives in what is called a host home, which is only available through the HCS waiver. And the host home model is essentially someone who is kind of like a roommate, but is also responsible for providing all the supports that Charlie needs. It could be that they help manage other people that come into the home to support Charlie, but they're ultimately the person managing that. And Charlie doesn't need a ton of support, but having someone there to help monitor things is what he benefits from.
Ginger, I have a question on these host homes, because this is something that actually comes up a lot in my practice, where we have families that have another house. Maybe they've been left one by other family members, or they simply just have another house, and they have a vision of a host home for their loved one. or maybe a group home, maybe there might be 3 or 4 residents that would live in this host home. And if that applies to a family, can they apply it for their house that that they have to be a host home, or what is the process if they want to go through that in that example? Because actually I hear it almost weekly.
Oh, wow. If the family themselves wants to be a host home for their adult child, they can do that. And I believe you have to go through contracting with the Health and Human Service Commission, but I can send you some information on that. You can't be a host home for your own child if they are a minor, but you can if they're your adult child. The thing that people need to know is if you become the host home provider, you are responsible for providing everything your child needs. So different than if you contract with a group home provider, then the group home provider is who coordinates and manages all the supports the individual needs.
So that's like a secondary option. So you could coordinate with an already approved HCS group home provider to help run that house so that they're responsible for all those types of things as opposed to doing it yourself, basically.
Yes.
Very good.
I'm not sure exactly how that process works.
That's
but,
okay. We'll dig more into it. I just wanted to know if it was possible, because we often do hear of families that have a house next door or a house nearby and semi independent living that they're hopeful for their adult kids, or the future of their adult kids. So I just wanted to ask about that. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. And I love those creative ideas that I hear about that too. Like me and my friend both have children that will need supports, and we have this house. And I think sometimes that creative, innovative thinking allows people to have the freedom they really want and get the supports they need. So this is my friend Ricky. Ricky also lived in institutions for a long time, but Ricky lives in his own apartment. He doesn't have a host home or a group home model. He lives in his own apartment, and the services he receives from the HCS waiver that support him in living in his own apartment are community first choice, which is an attendant who comes to his house and helps him get in and out of bed and dressed and bathed in the morning. Supported employment. So Ricky works full time and has assistants to do that. He has his own van that his attendant can drive him to and from work in. Lots of great services that Ricky receives that allow him to live as independently as anyone could imagine. And then I do want to say the big thing for a lot of people with the HCS waiver, you'll hear it referred to as like the most comprehensive or things like that. The reason people will say that is because it provides residential, whether it be through a group home, 3 or 4 person, or the host home model. It's the only waiver that provides that kind of support for people who maybe need 24-hour support, which is typically where the group home model comes in. And so that's why you'll hear that about the HCS waiver. And it's the only waiver, like I said, that provides that kind of thing, which is why a lot of people choose it. It's also the waiver we use to get people out of institutions or keep them from entering an institution. So we fund more HCS waivers than other waivers for that purpose. Now I want to talk about class waiver. Again, all of these waivers have a lot of services that I'm not mentioning. I'm highlighting some of the ones that people are typically most interested in, or what makes this waiver particularly unique. But the class waiver, what you hear a lot from people is that it provides specialized therapies. It's different than occupational therapy, physical therapy, that type of stuff. The specialized therapies are hippotherapy or equine therapy, where and that is sometimes misunderstood. It's not just recreational riding on a horse. It actually can help children learn how to walk, children and adults learn how to walk. It provides, class provides aquatic therapy, massage therapy, which again, massage therapy isn't just to relax and feel good. It can help some individuals reduce medication, the medication they have to take. It can reduce constipation. Massage therapy can be incredibly beneficial and help individuals rely less on pharmaceuticals. And then recreational therapy, which is a little bit of what I want to talk about with my friend Sky here, who's on the left. Recreational therapy really changed Sky's life and gave her a lot more of a quality of life. Sky is actually deafblind, has cerebral palsy, seizures. So she's eligible for the deafblind multiple disability waiver, but chose the class waiver largely because of these specialized therapies and how that would support her. Her recreational therapist recognized that Sky could learn to knit on a loom because she didn't need to be able to hear it or see it to knit. It's tactile, so she could feel that. And so the rec therapist worked with Sky and taught her how to knit scarves, which is what you see surrounding her. And Sky now runs her own business out of her parents' home where she lives, selling her scarves, which are beautiful. And it took that recreational therapist working with Sky to learn what Sky's needs and interests were to find this thing that Sky really enjoys and loves.
Can you hit on this a few minutes ago, but I would like to circle back because we were talking about all these different, the waivers were HCS, Texas Home Living, the Dbmd, and you said most of them had the same similar criteria, which is intellectual disability. So can you just talk quickly? Because I know there's some caveats. So we've got the IQ number, and then there's some ifs and buts, and then there's some confusion on this particular waiver. And I want you to talk about that, and then just the fact of the reminder that the qualification happens when they come up on the list, not when they go on the list. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so ignore the slide that's up. I'm not going to try to go backwards. And I will send you a chart that is super wonky in the weeds, but also will address all of this in detail that you can send to everyone. So remember early on, I talked about functional eligibility, which is essentially the non-financial part of what makes someone eligible for a waiver or not. So I'll start with HCS and Texas Home Living. They have the same eligibility criteria. You have to have an IQ below 70 with certain support needs or adaptive needs. I can't access it right now because the way my screens are. Or an IQ of 75 or below with a related condition. And a related condition is something like autism, cerebral palsy, blind, different things like that. So HCS and Texas Home Living have an IQ requirement in addition to functional limitations or limitations in activities of daily living, which is basically the support needs someone has. Then you have the class waiver, which I just talked about. Class does not have an IQ requirement. Class is, you can have an IQ below 70 or 75, but you don't have to. Class is about having a related condition. So it's a developmental disability. I don't really know why Texas makes things more confusing. Why don't we just say developmental disability, but instead we call it related condition? So cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, spina bifida, different things like that.
So basically, if somebody has a disability, let's use autism. So we have some kids that are on the spectrum that are also academically gifted. So they have some issues, but then on the other side of things, from an intellect perspective, then they're unaffected, and it's all across the board. So in that example, if they hit the other criteria, if a person has an autism diagnosis, but they're on the brilliant side of things, could they still qualify for class?
If they still have support needs, they could qualify for class.
Okay,
If you
so
can't, if you don't have a need for support with activities of daily living, then the assessment's going to show you don't have a need for the waiver. But yes, in terms of diagnoses, you could qualify for class. There is a huge caveat with HCS. If you are eligible for a nursing facility, you can also qualify for HCS without the IQ requirement. So if you are autistic and also take medication for seizures and, have that nursing need, you could also qualify for HCS. But that's a big caveat that if anybody thinks they're in that situation, reach out to me.
I have
for
one more
support.
question, and I know we'll move on. I know you've got a lot of slides, but as it relates to class, on that same vein, we're taking somebody on the autism spectrum. They're highly intelligent. Their IQ is well above 70 or 75. But from a functional perspective, activities of daily living, which I'm clear on what those are, but let's say this individual can't be left alone. They can't be left alone. They don't drive. They can't be left alone. They're a threat to themselves or others for the following whatever reasons. Does that fall into that category of the activities unable to perform the activities of daily living, like basically on their own for class?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, we have everybody all across the board, and everybody's in a different page, with their loved one, but we definitely do see some things like that. So basically, if that is your scenario and your loved one's IQ is above 70, 75, most of the waivers are not applicable to you. The class waiver may still be applicable if the individual has the inability to perform some of the activities of daily living or can't be left alone, basically.
Yes. And if you
Okay.
have nursing needs, HCS might
Got
be
it.
opened up to you. And the other two waivers, Dbmd and Star Plus, also don't have IQ requirements. So,
Okay.
Deafblind multiple disability waiver, it's the most obvious in the title. You have to be deafblind and have a third disability to qualify for Dbmd. So it's obviously the smallest waiver and very, very specific. And then Star Plus waiver, similar to the medically dependent children's waiver, MDCP and Star Plus, you have to be eligible for a nursing facility, is essentially how you access those two. I'll try to remember that as I go through the rest. So just to kind of touch on what is unique about the Dbmd waiver, or one of the things, there's a lot of different things in it. Intervener services is something you can get through this waiver. And what an intervener is, if we were in person, I'd ask if anybody knew, but I can't see you all. So I will just tell you, most people don't know that they know what it is. It's essentially like Anne Sullivan to Helen Keller. So because Helen Keller was deaf and blind, you couldn't sign to her or just speak to her. You have to touch her hand so she knows what's going on. And so Anne Sullivan was basically an intervener to Helen Keller in the fact that she communicated with her and helped Helen Keller see the world by touching her hand. Some people know it as tactile signing, and an intervener is the person who supports that. The Texas Home Living Waiver, like I said before, the same criteria that it's the same criteria as HCS, but the functional eligibility criteria is the same as HCS, but the financial eligibility is a little bit different. We do have a bill currently in the legislature that would make the financial eligibility the same in this waiver as everything else. So hopefully come May, we'll have good news and this waiver would be more of an option to people. It essentially provides most of the same stuff as HCS, minus the residential, and it's a lower cost cap. So a lot of times it's a really good waiver to support people who either have fewer support needs, or maybe their support needs at this time aren't that high because they're still young and living with their parents. But at some point they may need the more comprehensive services for HCS, maybe not. Each individual is different, but Texas Home Living can be a great option for people while waiting for a more comprehensive waiver. We have the medically dependent children's program. As I said, it's the only waiver specific to kids. A big thing people like to access in it is respite, because basic acute care kids, Star Kids Medicaid doesn't provide respite, and MDCP does. I'll just speak briefly to the importance of these waivers. Amelia, who's on the left, her father is a doctor, so they don't financially qualify for Medicaid, but they really need Medicaid because Amelia's has seizures and stops breathing in the middle of the night regularly. So they really need support that only Medicaid would provide, but they're not eligible financially. MDCP doesn't look at, well, none of the waivers look at parental income. So Amelia would automatically be eligible financially and then would be able to access these needed services. Unfortunately, because of our lengthy wait lists, their family is waiting for these critical services. And so mom, who's with her in this picture, lays next to her every night with her hand on her, so mom can wake up if Amelia stops breathing and assist her. And then the last waiver is the Star Plus waiver, or Star Plus HCBS. You'll hear it called sometimes, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services. Yes, this is Sky again. So when Sky was a kiddo, she had the class waiver and it was meeting her needs. When Sky turned 22 and became an adult through Medicaid, her nursing needs were a lot higher. And because adult Medicaid is different than children's Medicaid, she wasn't able to get enough nursing through the class waiver, because remember I said the class waiver waives off of intermediate care facilities or state supported living centers, not nursing facility. The Star Plus waiver waives off of nursing facility. So it's more specific to individuals who have those nursing needs. So in Sky's case, it was more beneficial to transition to the Star Plus waiver. That's definitely not everyone. Don't give up HCS or something for Star Plus without talking to someone like myself. But for some people, it's the best option. The really great thing about the Star Plus HCBS waiver is that if you have SSI already, then and are eligible functionally, so eligible for nursing facility level care, you can get the Star Plus waiver without a wait. So if you have SSI and are nursing facility eligible, you can get the Star Plus waiver without a wait. And yes, you can. Did I freeze? Okay, I just got a pop-up says making sure. And yes, you can take the Star Plus waiver while waiting for another waiver. So just because you're on a waiver doesn't mean you can't stay on the wait list for other waivers. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into great detail about the consumer-directed services service delivery option, but I want everyone to know that it exists. And if you have questions about it, I am more than happy to talk with people about it. That it is a way for you to manage your own services instead of having a provider do so. And there's a lot of great benefits to it, including, like my friend Ricky said on the slide with him, that he gets to choose who touches his body and when, because he hires and trains his own staff. It's not the right option for everyone, but for some people, it is a really great option. Sorry, I will say sometimes people get confused. CDS is not a waiver. It is an option in all of the waiver programs. In each waiver program, you can either have a provider or CDS or a mixture. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on managed care, but as you can see, Star Plus has two names. There's Star Plus Acute Care, Medical Managed Care, and then there's the Star Plus Waiver or HCBS. So don't get confused on that either. You'll have all of this for reference, and I could literally do an entire training just on Medicaid managed care, and I have. But we don't have time today to go into too much depth about it. So this is just a little teaser, but I'm happy to go into more detail at any point. In fact, most of you are probably more familiar with managed care than you may realize, because managed care is similar to what an HMO or a PPO is in private insurance world. And it's the big companies, United, Amerigroup, Cigna, Superior, et cetera. As you can see from this slide, Texas has been transitioning our waiver programs, well, all of our programs, into managed care since 2000. This is for the IDD side, but since 2014, we've been transitioning the IDD community into managed care. The physical nursing facility community moved into managed care earlier, but as you can see, right now, we've still got a long way to go before everything is moved into full managed care.
We have a question. Can you explain which waivers do not allow a court-appointed guardians to serve as a paid care provider?
Yes. This is always a tough one because there's always caveats. So you can be a paid care provider in most of the programs if the individual, so in HCS and Texas Home Living, if you live with the individual, whether you're the court-appointed guardian or not, if you live with the individual, you can't be a paid care provider. That's just in HCS and Texas Home Living. I believe in all the other waivers, you can be paid to provide the services if you're not using the CDS model. This is where it gets really confusing. If you're using the consumer-directed services model and you're the court-appointed guardian, then you're the employer of record, and you can't be the employer and the employee. So if you're using the provider model and the provider's willing to contract with you, I believe you can be paid, but you can't do it through the CDS model.
We've got a few minutes left, and I want to certainly open it up to questions, Ginger. But so the interest list, that's what we wanted to talk about, is because what we hear about all the time is how long the wait list is. So I want us to talk about how do they get on the interest list. One thing I want people to hear is that the interest list and class are different, like how to get on class, because sometimes people think they're on all the lists, but they're actually not on the class list. So I want to talk about that. And then I also want to talk about diversion slots if we get a second on so we've got this 14-year wait list, and what is a diversion slot and how does that work?
Yep. So basically this slide that it looks like I'm skipping. I'm not really skipping it because I'm going to break both of these, the interest list and the promoting independence, which is the diversion. Part of it is diversion that Allison just mentioned. I'm going to talk about both of those separately and answer all of Allison's questions. And to get on the interest list or wait list, which I prefer to just call it a wait list because that's what it is, we don't make it easy. If you need to get on all of them, you have to contact 3 different entities. MDCP, class, and Dbmd. All of those interest lists are run by the state. And so the number is right there. And you have to call that number. And people will debate me on this. And they're like, no. When I talked to so-and-so, they said they were putting me on all the lists. I don't care who told you that, it's wrong. And I hear it all the time. It's wrong. The state does not control HCS and Texas Home Living, and the LIDA does not control MDCP, class, and Dbmd. So it doesn't matter what they told you. Call that number for the first 3 waivers, as you see. For HCS and Texas Home Living and the community first choice, which I know we didn't get into, you need to contact your local intellectual and developmental disability authority. There's a different one in each area. I think there's 39. And so the link here is, if you go to that link, you can then type in your address and it'll tell you which local authority is yours, and you call that and request to be on the list.
And we've got people all across the state that are on today, but like Harris County is the Harris Center, which used to be MHMRA. Fort Bend County is going to be Texana. Pearland is going to be Gulf Coast. So there's some ones that come up on a regular basis that we hear all the time, but this is a great place to look it up, and you definitely want to connect with them. And basically, you want to check your status, and you want to make sure that you're still on the list every 2 years. They're supposed to be calling you. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you do want to make sure that your child remains on that list. So you want to check in every 2 years. And again, of course, call that class number and just double check that you are on the class list. And if not, make sure that you get on the class list. I think this is critically important. And if you're on some and not all of them, you're not alone. I think like she said, it happens a lot where people say, oh yeah, you're on all of them. You're on all of theirs. So it's
exactly.
Basically what happens. So it's, I think it's just, if you're taking notes, to double check on exactly what you're on is really, really important.
And the local IDD authority is also kind of your hub for almost all IDD type situations. So if you receive HCS or Texas Home Living, they'll be your service coordinator, and they coordinate a lot of different services for people with IDD. So they're good to know regardless. And as Allison mentioned, a lot of people still know them as MHMR. Almost all of them except one have changed their names to go away from MHMR, which is great to get rid of the R word, but now they all have vastly different names instead of something consistent. So then it gets super confusing on where to go. And then this is the last thing Allison mentioned as the crisis diversion. So unfortunately, Texas has continued to not fund the wait list and services adequately for years and years and years. So the wait list is now 170,000 plus individuals. I'm betting that it's increased to more than 15 years at this point for a lot of people. good news is that based on the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Olmstead decision that followed, we're not allowed to force people into an institution if they don't want to live there and it's appropriate for them to not live there. And so back to that institutional bias I talked about, as much as that exists in Texas in the sense that you wait all these years for community services and there's no wait for an institution, if you or your loved one is at the point of, without these services, our only option is an institution, or this person's health and safety will be at risk, or my health and safety, then we have something called a crisis diversion waiver. And again, your local IDD authority can help with that. Sometimes they have some trouble. There's a lot of turnover at the LIDAs. So depending on who you get, depends on how smooth that process is. I am always willing to help someone access a diversion waiver before they enter an institution. So do not put your loved one or yourself into an institution because the local authority said you don't qualify for a diversion without reaching out to me first. Because the term crisis is not black and white. You also do not have to enter an intermediate care facility and be turned away or kicked out in order to get a diversion. I hear that a lot. That's 100% not true. Do not go into an ICF in order to get a diversion.
So yeah, that's really good information, and we do get calls on that periodically from people that have adults with disabilities. Maybe they're getting their loved one is getting older, which means as a parent you're getting older. I've had people call me, they're 70, 75, 80 years old, saying I can't do this anymore, or their loved one has aggression issues or some other issues, they're the threat to themselves or others. Or here's a person, a parent, and they've been taking care of their loved one all this time, and now this parent has been diagnosed with something horrible and they're going to be going through treatment and things like that, so they won't have the capacity to provide the care that they once provided before. All of those are valid concerns that should be brought up to the LIDA for the discussion of the diversion slot. But again, I think that the message that you made that's really clear is that just don't just go away with your tail between your legs if they say no. You should expect that they're going to say no. And that's what the ARC of Texas and Ginger Mayeaux is here for, and she's going to help you with that kind of thing. So if you have run into a brick wall or you're beating your head up against the wall with something like this and your situation is bleak and tough, then there is certainly help for you. So I just wanted to convey that message out there. We're
Thank
just
you. And don't
just
get me
about out of
wrong,
time.
and I am watching the time, Allison, but don't get me wrong, I work very closely with the local IDD authorities, and a lot of times it can even just take me giving them a call and saying, hey, I don't know if you were aware of this, or this policy changed. And so it's a good partnership where we're educating each other and supporting each other.
For sure. We have one other question. My daughter lives with me and has IDD, and I get paid by class as her caregiver. I'm guardian. If her name comes up on HCS, does my income source disappear?
That's a great question. So currently, if you plan to continue living with her or having her live with you, then yes. Now, due to COVID-19, the state of Texas has waived that. So right now, you can be the guardian, the guardians doesn't actually matter. You can live with the person you're providing services to in HCS and Texas Home Living. As of now, that will go away whenever the state decides to get rid of the temporary rules. We are advocating very heavily to keep that in place forever. I can't promise anything, but the ARC of Texas and others would really like to see people who live in the same home as the person they provide care for, be able to get paid. I don't know why it's only in those 2 waivers that we discriminate against it. So we'll keep working.
For sure. 2 other little comments. So we want to just circle back to, so as far as the interest list, it's your LIDA, your local intellectual disability authority, is that for your county, for your address, that's where you're going to get on the list. And then there's an 800 number specifically for class. And one person brought up that it is important. We said you want to follow up on these interest lists and make sure that you're still on the list every 2 years. But another thing that is super important for you guys to follow up with is if you move, your address changes, your cell phone number changes, email address changes, that kind of thing. You definitely need to update your contact information with them as well. So because basically if they're reaching out to you in an old email and asking if you still want to be on the list and you don't respond because you didn't get the email, it doesn't matter if they took your loved one off the list because of no response. So that is something that is super, super important. Ginger, you're always awesome, and there's never enough hours in the day to get through all of this information. It is a little overwhelming kind of understanding what's all out there. We do have more information on the Yes Waiver, and a lot of our families do benefit from the Yes Waiver. For people with disabilities that have mental health issues, basically any of the initials that come along with ODD, ADHD, DMDD, all of these initials, mental health stuff. The Yes Waiver could be a really great fit for you. It's based off of your kids' assets, not yours. So even if you make a lot of money, your child may qualify for the Yes Waiver. So that's one thing to know, and you definitely check this out with your LIDA as well. And then the other thing, with the Yes Waiver, it's basically a wraparound program tailored to that child and their specific needs. And the biggest thing with the Yes Waiver is in most areas, there's not a waiting list because most people don't actually even know about the Yes Waiver. So there isn't a 17-year waiting list with the Yes Waiver. You might be able to get your loved one into the Yes Waiver right away, going through that intake process. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's worth checking into if you have kids with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, ADHD. I mean, the list goes on and on. But any of those aggression, runaway, drug issues, aggression at school or things like that. So I just wanted to put that out there so you guys know that. So Ginger, did you have anything else that you wanted to share before we close for today? And you're going to send me that detailed spreadsheet. Basically, you said it was a little convoluted, but we'll put that out to the families when we send the recording. It basically kind of gives them a checklist of what the waivers are and who they support, correct?
Yes. And the only thing I was going to add is to Allison's point about making sure you update your contact information so that they can reach out to you and make sure you still want to be on the interest list or offer you a waiver slot, which is why you really want to have your contact information updated so you can get that call right away. If you find yourself in a situation where you didn't know that they'd been trying to reach you and now they're telling you they removed you from the list or anything like that, reach out to me or Disability Rights Texas. There are ways to address that and make sure that people get back on the list in their original spot. And we are also currently working with the Texas legislature to try and establish some sort of online portal where it's easy for you to sign up for all the lists at once, as well as update your own information. Exactly. Again, we're only in April, so no promises, but we are working with the Texas legislature on that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ginger. Thank you again for being with us here today. And we will get these slides out to you, the recording to everyone later this afternoon or tomorrow. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. And Ginger, we'll definitely catch up with you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye now.